Welcome to our lecture on Shelley. So let's look at our book. This is about, you can find the page in your book that gives your bio of Shelley, just pretty briefly about him. Your book tells you that, he's born into a pretty conservative family, a family who have for generations been aristocrats in Sussex, and they actually are probably the wealthiest people in the area. He was a Baron, I'm sorry, Byron Baron. He was a baron, and he was sent to Eton and Oxford because that's where you sent your children, your sons, if they were going to be in line for a title. But your book tells you that he was pretty severely bullied by the other students there, and because he was kind of, small in stature, he didn't like sports, he was very intellectual and just a bit odd. And so we see some of his writings talking about, criticizing the schoolmasters and things like that. And we think that he really got a lesson in that when he was there. In 1810, he and a friend publish The Necessity of Atheism, where he's basically saying that you can't prove God empirically, right? There's no way you can actually rationally, with evidence, prove God, right? And they intentionally sent this to the very people who would be very highly offended by that. And so they got in trouble. And because Shelley wouldn't recant his position, they expelled him. And this caused problems between him and his father for, I guess, for pretty much the rest of his life. He goes to London and he meets this Harriet Westbrook, who is the daughter of a very wealthy tavern keeper, and she has issues and she is suicidal. And so he marries her to just try to prevent her from killing herself. And she worships him, but she's not someone that's going to be a good partner for him. They do eventually have children, but he has an affair with a woman named Elizabeth. And then he meets William Godwin in 1813, around that time. And Godwin is a very big influence on him. Godwin is, of course, Mary Wollstonecraft's husband, and he is a political activist. And he really believes that the system can be reformed. And so Shelley is highly influenced by him, and it's while he is, in Godwin's company that he meets Mary Wollstonecraft's daughter, and they fall in love, right? But he's married to Harriet. And so, he married Harriet even though he didn't really believe in the institution of marriage. It was one of those restrictive social constraints that he always railed against. But he certainly felt justified in not living with her if he didn't love her. And so he and Mary run off to France. Godwin is not happy. And it's kind of hypocritical of him in some ways. First of all, he himself expressed the very same beliefs about marriage that Shelley is acting on, right? But it's okay, but not with my daughter, right? And then also Shelley used his money, kind of much impoverished himself by paying off Godwin's debts, right? But Godwin just, isn't happy. When they return to England, Shelley finds that because he's abandoned his wife, he now is considered a libertine. And this is in addition to revolutionary and atheist, which are also kind of, after he published Queen Mab, with his views about, the evils of almost all social institutions, right? Political, economic, religious, military, and all of that. And he, again, believes that, you can't believe that God exists. He's called an atheist and revolutionary throughout the rest of his life, but then now he's also, immoral. And a libertine would be someone who would take advantage of young, naive girls. So he's not happy. And again, everyone believes this, even friends and family. Harriet is, within 2 years, Harriet drowns herself. She's actually had another lover and gotten pregnant. And the courts give the custody of Percy and Harriet's children to Harriet's parents. And so I think it's her parents, somebody in her family. But Percy moves on, and he and Mary get married, and within a couple of years they are in Italy. They're having financial troubles because Shelley has money, but he keeps helping other people out, loaning them money, and that he's spending it. So they kind of are nomadic a bit. And his health is irregular. It's not very good. He is a vegetarian, so we don't know if they really understood about how to get all that protein in that you need. So, but he'd been a long time vegetarian. And ultimately, both of their children die, Clara and William. Now, they do have a son that grows to adulthood, but I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But their two children die, and that seems to cause problems with the marriage that never really truly reconciled. But he's writing during this time, and he is in exile, and so he has, in one way, this vision of himself as this person who's been rejected by the very group of people in society that he has spent, his time trying to change the system for. So they reject him because he's an atheist, he's revolutionary, and all that, and yet he is those things because he wants to reform society so that people are treated fairly. And so, he has that part of him, but then there's also that very idealistic side that never goes away, that he's always looking. Your book talks about that, someone commented that he was always reading, and reading a wide variety of stuff, the Bible and natural science and Shakespeare and all these things, right? So I think your book talks that, he's been labeled as a skeptical idealist, right? He never lost his idealism, though experiences in his life showed him that the chances of things changing were very slim, right? He didn't know if people would actually be able to change. And I think these are some of the contradictions that people see in his writing. He does write the defensive poetry, which I had you read. We'll talk a little bit about that. There's really just, first of all, it's a really important thing to read because it's an important part of literature, like lyrical ballads. But what I wanted you to get out of that is basically just, his ideal about the role of the poet in society and the role of poetry, right? He famously says that the poet is the unacknowledged legislator of the world. And this very much, and I think this jibes with the Platonic aspects of his writing that the book talks about. Plato would have said a philosopher king instead of a poet, but Shelley really thought that a legislator is someone who makes laws, right? And poets are the ones, though we don't acknowledge them, but they're the ones who set the law for the world. So it's not for a country, it's kind of like it's something that's universal. And poets are the ones who do this because this is this romantic view. Poets are closest to nature. And I think when we see To a Skylark, that is the best expression of the poems that I had you read, of this idea that poets cannot be in nature. We're human, we've got all these things that keep us, a breach between us, but poets can learn from nature in ways that other people can't, and then they can write about things in ways that reveal the truths of nature. And this is what we should be living by, not these rules that are made by people, and we'll see this in England in 1819, people who have their own interests at heart or who are bound by tradition and all these things, right? These are the real rules that should, teach us how to act, right? And so he really liked Plato's idea that there were two worlds. There was the world of the perfect. Plato called this the world of forms, right? If you're interested in that, this is in book 7 of the Republic. It's the famous allegory of the cave. I mean, he says it in other places, but it's most expressly, I think, easily expressed in that excerpt. But basically, Plato believed that there was a perfect world where everything that we see around us exists in its perfect form, and it never changes because it's perfect. And then you have the world of being. So you have the world of becoming, the world of being, right? So the world of being is the perfect world, right? You are, you don't change. The world of becoming is the world around us. This is the imperfect world where things are mutable, things change, right? We don't know what truth really is because all we see are shadows of truth, right? And so he liked that. And yet he also had this belief that you had to experience things through your five senses to really understand them. Well, Plato would have said, well, your five senses are illusionary, that it is the body is the prison house of the soul. The soul is eternal. It understands everything, but when it's stuck in our body, it can only understand things through our five senses, and our five senses are unreliable, right? And so Shelley, again, here's another contradiction, that he believes in this perfect world, right? And that this world is imperfect and flawed, and yet he also believes that you learn important things by living in the world. And so I think, again, that skeptical idealism. We have to live in this world. We cannot live in the perfect world because we're not part of that. So we have to deal with it and experience it. But we also should always remember what we should be striving for. I think, in my way, that's my best way of kind of talking about how he has these different, seemingly contradictory impulses, right? And again, he ties this to very much a sense of moral responsibility and duty, which I think that's in that defense of poetry, that, this is the duty of people who have this gift to be able to translate the truths of nature into a form that humans can understand, even if they are blinded by the restrictions of society, right? And again, we have to hope, because there's always a possibility, right? In 1820, he and Mary and their children and their one son, they end up in Pisa, and this is in the Byron introduction. It also talks about this is the Pisan circle, and so Shelley is part of this, and Byron is part of this. He meets this man named Edward Williams, and he and Edward in 1822 take a boat out on the lake, the Don Juan, ironically, and this violent storm, just pops up, and the boat is lost, and about 3 days later, I think, the bodies are washed ashore. At the time, there was a great fear that there was some kind of, I'm not sure what the word plague is going on, but there was a disease, and people were worried that he might have carried the disease, so they cremated his body. There is a story, though, that says that Mary had his heart cut out and kept it in a little black box. And there's a famous portrait of Mary Shelley, and she's all in, her hair's all pulled back, and she's in black. She always wore mourning the rest of her life, black mourning gowns. And she's holding in her hands this little box, and supposedly Shelley's heart is in that, right? But he was buried in Rome, just very close to Keats. In fact, at the bottom of the Spanish Steps in Rome, there's a little museum to Keats and Shelley there, because Keats stayed in that area. We'll talk about this when we get to Keats, but he came to Rome because of his tuberculosis, because the air was much drier and warmer, and he eventually died there in that room, and so they made a museum to him. So your book talks about how people just trying to make sense of Shelley, and some people thought he was maybe arrogant and pretentious. But I'm going to read to you what Byron wrote. And again, Byron wasn't someone who suffered fools greatly. And so he wrote this to a publisher about Keats, who, again, people who were criticizing Keats, talked about he was just egotistical and all that. And Byron wrote, "You're all brutally mistaken about Shelley, who was, without exception, the best and least selfish man I ever knew," right? And then Wordsworth also, though he and Shelley were not close, they had a lot of differences in philosophy. He did say that Shelley was the best artist of them all, that no one could, handle meters and stanzas and things like that, the metrical and stanza part of writing poetry better than Shelley. I don't know. I'm kind of you might have guessed this, I'm kind of a fan of Byron, but again, Wordsworth acknowledged that. So, again, Shelley can be difficult because of all of the poets we've read so far. He is the one who is most philosophical and I think most abstract in his way of writing. But hopefully I'll give you some insights and you'll see these kind of common themes that come in his work. So we're starting off with one of the most popular poems anthologized by Shelley, which is Ozymandias. This is a sonnet. Ozymandias is the Greek word for Ramses II, the Egyptian pharaoh, ruled about 1300 BC. So again, it's a sonnet, so we know it's an iambic pentameter. This follows a Petrarchan sonnet in terms of that it's broken up into an octave and a sestet. The Shakespearean sonnet, it has 3 quatrains and a couplet at the end. So this is, or So this is the Petrarchan or Italian sonnet. Shakespeare is also called the English sonnet. But Shelley seems to like the Petrarchan sonnet. It doesn't have a common Petrarchan rhyme scheme. It does have a regular rhyme scheme, but it doesn't necessarily follow the regular one that we see in Petrarchan, but it does follow one, right? So in terms of figurative language, there's a lot of irony here in that there's a contrast between what the pedestal is inscribed in and yet what nature shows us around it, right? But again, not necessarily a lot of specific metaphor, simile, and all that here, right? The Romantics keep it pretty simple. I do think, though, that Ozymandias itself is a symbol. It is representative of what's going on in England, right? So again, with this one, and in England in 1819, we're going to see, I think, him giving a cautionary tale. So let's look at this one. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, right, so this sets up what we call as a frame story. There's a story within a story. And this actually has, I think, a story within a story within a story, because you have the narrator who is telling us about who he met, right? So we're not getting this firsthand. And then he's telling us what this traveler is telling him, and the traveler is telling him what Ozymandias had written, right? So I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on that pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. And then it ends there with the traveler speaking. So we never get the narrator telling us his own commentary, right? So imagine one of these colossal, gigantic statues in, Egypt or something, right? And it's intentionally been, the visage is going to be, very frightening, right? Because again, you want them to, Michelangelo called it terribilità, right? That when he did like the statue of David, David's got that frowning intensity, right? So this is what Ramses wanted the sculptor to sculpt, right? And he has created this image of himself and the statement of, so at one point around the statue, there were incredible works, buildings, things like that. But now the sand has eaten them all away. Even the statue itself is broken. It's just 2 basically legs, no trunk, right? So there's no body in the top. The body is gone except for the head that's broken and laying down on the sand near the feet, right? And so again, basically what we're seeing here, our theme is hubris, right? So Ozymandias thought that he was immortal in the works that he made, right? But that's not true. We see the power of nature versus man, so nature always wins. There's also a comment on political power, right? Ozymandias is nothing now, right? And then there's the timeliness of art and literature, and that the only thing that remains of him at this point is the stature. So art, the art that created the stature, and the literature, the writing on the bottom. Those are the only thing that's left of Ozymandias in terms of this statue. And so there's a timelessness that art and literature, rather than politics or something like that, are the things that are universal, right? So again, you can see, that irony, and again, that very common romantic theme that nature is the real power. And if we think that we're more powerful than nature, we're just setting ourselves up for failure. Right? So another one, this is considered one of his more aggressively political poems. There was something called the Peterloo Massacre that happened in England that we believe this is Shelley. We know Shelley was very upset. This is where people were standing up and the military came in and shot them and killed them, right? So this is Iambic Pentameter. It is a sonnet, but it is very irregular, not only the rhyme, but instead of having an octave and a sestet like a regular Petrarchan. He flips it. He has a sestet followed by the octave. Some people want to see that this is him saying that the whole system is upside down as well, right? So we do have metaphor. The princes equal dregs. We have simile when he says they're leech-like. And overall, there's hyperbole here that he's really over the top in his descriptions of how much they're doing it, right? They're just exaggerated. Though I put that on there because I've read that somewhere. I don't know that Shelley would have thought he was exaggerating. So it's like hyperbole, okay, according to whom, right? But definitely he's really making it very, I mean, this is very demanding, explicit, stark language, right? So the themes that we can see here are social, religious, and political oppression and injustice. This is kind of a warning of the future when the wrongs will be exposed and taken care of. I think we can also see that oppression kills, right? The fields are untilled, so it's not fertile. It doesn't grow anything. It just, stifles things. The lifeblood of the country is being sucked out by these people. But there's that weird skeptical idealism. It ends with an optimistic note, and it's very vague. We don't know who this phantasm is going to be. Is it a real thing? Is it revolution or what, right? But something is going to change, right? So let's look at this. This is an old, mad, blind, despised, and dying king. So that's George III. That's the king during the American Revolution, right? George was about 81 at this time, and he was sick. I think he had porphyria. So he was insane, right? Princes. So this could be referring to the nobility, but it certainly is referring to George IV, or Prinny, as he's called. This is the Prince Regent at the time, who then becomes George IV. Byron and Shelley just thought he was a waste of space. So he says, princes, the dregs of their dull race, who flow through public scorn, mud from a muddy spring. So you think about George III as the muddy spring, and his offspring is the mud, right? Rulers, who neither see nor feel nor know, but leech-like to their fainting country cling, till they drop blind in blood without a blow. So they're sucking on the country until they're just like, they're sucking it out. The country is dying, it's fainting. And eventually these rulers just kind of drop because they're so overwhelmed with blood, right? So that's that sestet. That sets up the problem. We have these rulers who are just leeches on society. They're bad. The octave then gives the list of what's happening, right? And so a people starved and stabbed in the untilled field, an army whom liberticide and prey makes as a two-edged sword to all who wield. So we believe that he's referring here to the troops that are used to quell riots and rebellion and to shoot and kill people. It's a two-edged sword, right? And so the idea is that even as it's killing these people, it is also hurting itself, right? Golden and sanguine laws which tempt and slay. So sanguine means blood, right? So this is inheritance, and golden, so these are laws that basically benefit those who are wealthy or who have some kind of blood tie to whatever, right? It's not for everyone. So special interests, right? Religion, priceless, godless, a book sealed. So obviously he's an atheist. So he sees that, these people can't grow, can't think. They think they know it all, right? When actually their religion is without the very things that they say it has, right? And it says, a Senate, time's worst statute unrepealed. This we think is referring to the laws on Catholics. Catholics could not serve in political office. There was still a lot of discrimination that wasn't repealed into the Victorian times. So he and Byron both spoke out about the need for Catholic emancipation. And he says, in all of these things that are dying because of this, right? These are graves from which a glorious phantom may burst to illumine our tempestuous day. So he's saying that skeptical idealism, that maybe it will happen, that something will rise, a glorious phantom, right? And it will shed light on us. It'll expose all of this, and we will see the truth finally, right? All right, so last one, To a Skylark. So this one has alternating meter, but he pretty much keeps it straight. So the first lines The first and third line are trochaic trimeter. So that's the opposite of iambic, bump, 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 right? The second and fourth lines are trochaic dimeter, and then the last line, the fifth line, is iambic hexameter. So there's 6 iambs, right? This is written in cinquain, so these are 5-line stanzas, and he follows it A B A B B C D C D D. So he follows a regular rhyme scheme, right? We have metaphor. The bird is a blithe spirit. He says, you're a blithe spirit. You're not a bird, you're a spirit. But also the bird represents pure poetical expression, so it's a metaphor for that. We do have apostrophe. He's talking to this bird that's not there. And there's simile. You can find the simile like he's an unbodied joy, right? So the themes that we're going to see throughout this are unity with nature, the joy from communion and harmony with nature, this pure existence, right? So he's kind of saying that here at this part. He's saying that the bird's song, like the poet's, touches the unconscious parts of the self and brings hope, right? So it's like a poet hidden in the light of thought, singing hymns unbidden to the world is wrought to sympathy with hopes and fears it heeded not. So again, it can open people's eyes and hearts to, reality, right? It can make them better. Right, down here in this section, you can see he's asking the bird to teach him. So this is again, romantic trope that we should learn from nature. No one is a better teacher, right? And Shelley's saying, I've never heard anything as more beautiful as this voice, whether you are an actual bird or you're a sprite. So a sprite or a spirit would be something that it looks like it's a bird, but it's actually not. It's something that's kind of supernatural, right? And he says that human works, right? The chorus hymeneal or the triumphal chant. These are things that humans have written, right? When we compare them to the bird's song, we recognize that something's missing. We might not realize what it is, but there's something that's gone from those songs that when we listen to the song of the bird, we hear the full thing, right? And he says part of this is because the bird just simply exists in nature. It's in harmony with nature. Humans, though, are never happy. We're always thinking of what's coming before or what's come after, or what came after what's coming before. No, I still said yeah, you know what I mean. Rather than living in the present moment like nature does, right? Nature doesn't think about what's coming. It doesn't think about past grievances. It just exists. And humans need to be able to try to throw off those chains that society puts on us, right? The worry about, well, where's the next paycheck coming from? Or, oh my gosh, I was sick last time, I'm going to be sick again. Those kind of things. Excuse me. Right? We're never happy. And that's, again, one of these romantic beliefs, these ideas about, yes, being able to see the past and look to the future, but also being able to enjoy the present. And this is something that nature does that humans have a problem with. And so he says the bird is better than the poet, right? And then he ends up with saying, if you could just teach me even half of your joy, your ability, then I would be able to express that and people would actually listen to me, right? And so again, you think about Shelley being someone who feels rejected from the world, and writers worry if people didn't understand what I was writing, or if they misunderstood it, or if they just rejected it, what can I do to get them to hear me, to get them to listen to me? I mean, this is a common writer's, worry, that I have something important to say, and yet why do people not get it, right? And so I think we see him saying that at the end, if I could just tap into nature and even just in some small measure be able to reproduce what they're doing, then maybe people would finally hear what I'm saying, right? And I think when we get to Keats's Ode to a Nightingale, we're going to really see, in a much more flowery and a much more preferred way for me, the way he's kind of expressing the same thing, only he's talking to a nightingale, not a lark. I think it's important in, the nightingale is a bird that sings at night. The lark is the bird that's traditionally associated with the break of day. right? There's a famous the scene between Romeo and Juliet where they have just had their wedding night, and he's of course under exile. He's got to flee, and so they hear the bird, and she wakes up, and he says, you know, he's saying, "Oh, that's the bird. Is that the lark? Because if that's the lark, that means the sun is rising, and I need to get out of here." She goes, "Oh, no, no, it's an owl or something," and he's, "No, it's the lark, right?" Shakespeare's one sonnet says, "And like a lark to break of day," right? So I think it's interesting that Shelley sees this in terms of this is the, you know, the rising of the sun. This is a bird that sings in the day, right? Whereas Keats is going to see this as the bird that sings at night that's a little bit more mysterious. So it's not exactly the same, but they're both seeking the same thing. So I hope you enjoyed or understood Shelley a little bit more. Our next lecture will be on Keats, so I will see you then.